In the late 1990s, a sudden phone call shattered the calm of peaceful London. It rang through the quiet halls of a local police station, a woman on the other end, pleading, warning authorities about a murder that was about to happen. But instead of intervening, the police dismissed the call. That moment of indifference would become the starting point of a harrowing tragedy that slowly began to unfold. To truly understand what happened, we must go back to the life of Surjit Kaur Athwal and the events that shaped her fate. Born in 1971, Surjit was raised in London in a traditional Punjabi family. Although they lived in the heart of England, her parents held firmly to the customs of their homeland. They brought her up according to what they believed was right, with strict rules about clothing, behavior, and a woman's role within the family. Like other children, Surjit was allowed to attend school. But when it came time to pursue higher education, her parents abruptly put a stop to it. At the age of 16, they arranged her marriage without asking for her opinion. Even though they lived in London, a place that valued individual choice, Surjit's family clung tightly to conservative beliefs rooted in the past. Surjit tried to speak up. She said she wasn't ready to get married, that she wanted to keep studying and build her future through her own efforts. But her voice was quickly ignored, along with her dreams and desires. Her parents forced her into marriage with Sukhdev Singh, a man from Punjab whose family had also settled in the UK. Everything happened so quickly that Surjit had no time to resist. Before the wedding, she met the groom's family just once. She was only 16, a young girl, still emotionally and mentally unprepared to understand the full weight of marriage. With no support and no guidance, she was left with no choice but to say yes. Soon after, Surjit moved in with her in-laws and took on her new role as a daughter-in-law. The house had only 4 other people, yet the atmosphere inside was stifling. Bachchan Kaur Athwal, the matriarch, was well known in the community for leading religious hymns, but behind closed doors, she was strict, domineering, and unrelenting. Even though her sons were grown men, she remained the sole decision-maker in the household. Living under the same roof was Hardev Athwal, Sukhdev's older brother. From the day of the wedding, Surjit became the 5th member of a family ruled entirely by Bachchan. And as she tried to adapt to her new life, the suffocating control inside the home became painfully clear. Some of the tension came from the generational gap, but the deeper issue stemmed from the mother-in-law herself. When Surjit first moved in, she was still a 16-year-old girl who had never been taught how to cook or clean. Instead of guiding her with patience, Bachchan lashed out with harsh insults and physical punishment, even for the smallest mistakes in daily chores. From that point on, every burden in the household fell squarely on Surjit's shoulders. She was forced to cook all day and handle every chore alone. Even the housekeeper was dismissed so that every task would be left to her. Day after day, the cruelty intensified, slowly draining the strength of a young woman overwhelmed by relentless pressure. The more hopeless she became, the more Surjit clung to the belief that her husband might come to her defense. But instead, he remained cold and distant, insisting that all decisions were up to Bachchan. After crushing his wife's hopes, he began to mimic the very woman who raised him, becoming increasingly harsh and devoid of compassion. For a long time, Surjit kept everything hidden from her own parents, but when the abuse escalated beyond what she could endure, she had no choice but to reveal the truth. With nowhere else to turn, she returned to her parents' home, physically and emotionally broken. She recounted everything she had suffered, the beatings, the insults, the endless cycle of unpaid, unacknowledged labor. But instead of offering protection, her parents dismissed it as part of married life. They believed things would improve if she simply endured. They told her that once she had a child, her husband would change, and her mother-in-law would eventually soften into something resembling a real mother. In the end, they quietly sent her back to her husband's house. Holding on to the fragile hope her parents had planted in her heart, Surjit tried to reintegrate into her old life, believing that change was still possible. 6 months after the wedding, her father-in-law passed away. Time moved on in silence until 1991, when Surjit gave birth to a healthy baby boy. For the first time in years, she smiled. She hoped the child would bring peace to the household. that he would calm her mother-in-law's temper and inspire her husband to become more caring. But what followed was the exact opposite of what she had hoped. Surjit's life didn't get better. It became even more suffocating. Her mother-in-law grew more demanding, angrier without cause, placing the entire weight of the household on Surjit's already exhausted frame. During long, sleepless nights caring for a newborn, she received virtually no help from her in-laws. From that moment on, all that awaited her was an unending storm. At night, Surjit sat awake beside the crib, soothing her baby with dark circles under her eyes from sheer exhaustion. By morning, she was plunged into another mountain of chores, no rest, no relief. Every responsibility was forced upon the shoulders of a woman left entirely alone. Whenever the baby cried, her mother-in-law would storm into the room and scream at her with merciless cruelty. And Surjit wasn't the only one trapped in that suffocating atmosphere. In 1992, Sukhdev's older brother Hardev got married. His bride was Sarbjit, a kind, gentle young woman from a Sikh family living in the UK. She was warm, sincere, and easygoing. But within just a few days of stepping into her new home, Sarbjit began to sense that something was terribly wrong beneath the surface. Just like Surjit, Sarbjit also had to endure a life of constant judgment and control. In that household, being a daughter-in-law meant staying silent, submitting, and never asking for anything. After years of carrying the weight in silence, Surjit began to feel physically depleted and mentally worn down. Eventually, she made a decision to find a way out, even temporarily, by looking for work outside the home. It was the only way she could reclaim a small piece of peace for herself. Surjit knew full well that both her husband and mother-in-law would likely object, but she quietly searched for suitable jobs anyway. Whenever she took her child for vaccinations or stopped by convenience stores, she would discreetly ask if anyone was hiring. One afternoon, she visited a local job center near the train station and discovered that Heathrow Airport was hiring baggage screeners. She applied on the spot, and within weeks, she officially started working there as a customs officer. From that moment on, those 8-hour shifts became the happiest part of Surjit's day. Before then, she had felt trapped, isolated at home, exhausted from endless chores, and unsupported by her family. But stepping outside allowed her to slowly open up, and she began sharing her personal story with others. Gradually, her coworkers started to notice her situation. They couldn't understand why a hard-working mother with a stable job was still living under such intense pressure. Encouraged by their concern and advice, Surjit started to seriously reconsider her circumstances. Then, one early morning, she quietly left the house with her child in her arms. Near the airport, she found a small room to rent and began living independently for the first time in her life. But that peace didn't last long. Sukhdev soon tracked down her new residence and started showing up uninvited, creating chaos and demanding she return home. He frequently shouted, disturbed the neighbors, and kept escalating the pressure. Left with little choice, Surjit agreed to come back on one condition: they would live separately from his family this time. To her surprise, Sukhdev didn't hesitate. He even told Bachchan to prepare for them to buy a new house, just next door to the old one. Surjit moved in with her daughter once more, while continuing her job at the airport as before. However, the change in address didn't bring any change in Sukhdev's behavior. Seeing Surjit working outside and interacting with others made him increasingly suspicious. Dark thoughts crept in. He began to believe she might be seeing another man. That suspicion grew quietly but steadily, and it began to shape how he treated her. The simmering tension reached its peak in 1997 when Surjit became pregnant with their second child and gave birth to another baby boy. But instead of joy, Sukhdev reacted with hostility, accusing her of infidelity and insisting the child wasn't his. His accusations devastated her. Even worse, it wasn't just him. His entire family began treating Surjit with distrust, casting suspicious glances and growing distant with every passing day. It was in this atmosphere of mounting tension that Surjit began seeking comfort outside her family. She started spending more time with her coworkers at the airport. the only place where she felt seen and supported. Over time, she grew close to a younger man, and what began as friendship quietly blossomed into a deep romantic connection. But Surjit had no idea that Sukhdev had been secretly watching her for weeks. Eventually, he discovered the truth about the affair. Rather than keeping the matter private, Sukhdev chose to weaponize his rage. He told his mother and other members of the Athwal family everything, igniting a firestorm of anger. In their eyes, Surjit had not only disgraced herself, but had tarnished the honor of the entire family. Knowing she could no longer hide the situation, Surjit took decisive action. In November 1998, she formally requested a divorce from Sukhdev. Shaken by the turn of events, Sukhdev turned to the one person he had always depended on, his mother, Bachchan. But rather than offer guidance or support, Bachchan flatly rejected the idea of divorce. Instead, she called a secret family meeting at their home. What followed was nothing short of chilling. Present at that meeting were Bachchan, Sukhdev, Hardev, and Hardev's wife, Surjit. In a room thick with tension, Bachchan declared that Surjit had brought shame to the family by attempting to leave her husband for another man. Therefore, before she could follow through, they needed to eliminate her, permanently. No one protested. In fact, the room seemed to grow colder with silent agreement. Bachchan revealed that she had already hired a hitman in India to kill Surjit. The most terrifying part was that everyone in the room approved. The most eager of them all was Sukhdev, Surjit's own husband. Only Surjit, Hardev's quiet and timid wife, sat frozen in fear. She had wanted to warn Surjit but stayed silent, afraid of retaliation from both Bachchan and her husband. The very next day, Bachchan's tone changed dramatically. She approached Surjit with unusual warmth, claiming there was a family wedding taking place in India. As the eldest daughter-in-law, she said, it was Surjit's duty to attend the ceremony with her. Playing on Surjit's trust, Bachchan dangled a false sense of hope. She reminded her that in all the years since joining the family, the two of them had never traveled together. If Surjit truly wanted a divorce, Bachchan said, they should go to India first, and everything would be resolved once they returned. She even advised Surjit not to tell any relatives yet, saying it would be better to keep it quiet for now. Moved by this unexpected gentleness, Surjit began to believe that freedom was finally within reach. A few days later, all the preparations were complete. Flights were booked, departure on December 3rd, with a return scheduled for the 18th. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But beneath that calm exterior was a horrifying plan that Bachchan had already mapped out in her mind. Her goal was clear. Surjit was to be killed in India. Surjit was the only person who knew the full extent of the plan, and she was terrified. The unbearable pressure eventually forced her to beg her husband to stop his mother. But Hardev coldly ordered her to stay silent, and even threatened her if she dared to speak. Fearing for her own life, Surjit stayed quiet, unable to warn Surjit. When the departure day arrived, everything went exactly according to plan. December 3rd, 1998 marked the start of the fateful journey to India. But just hours before the flight, with fear and guilt boiling over, Surjit made a bold move. She got into a car, drove far from her neighborhood, and stopped at a public phone booth. Unable to wait any longer, she dialed the number for Crime Stoppers, a UK organization that receives anonymous tips about criminal activity. To Surjit, this was her last chance to save Surjit before it was too late. Her voice shook as she told the operator she needed to report an imminent crime. She then shared every detail she knew: flight information, the names of Bachchan and Surjit, and the outlines of the deadly plan that was already in motion. After hanging up, Surjit returned home and stood by the window, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Hours later, she quietly watched from behind the curtain as Bachchan and Surjit left for the airport. Surjit bent down to hug her 7-year-old daughter and the younger child in her mother's care before wheeling her suitcase toward the car. In the shadows of that room, Surjit couldn't hold back tears. A sinking fear overwhelmed her, that this might be the last time anyone would ever see Surjit alive. Bachchan's absence gave Surjit a sliver of hope to hold on to. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, she looked up the address of the local police station and wrote a desperate letter, pleading for action before it was too late. With as much clarity as she could muster, she wrote down the most critical details, everything except her own identity. She knew revealing her name would be fatal. A woman like Bachchan, who had orchestrated a murder to protect her family's reputation, wouldn't hesitate to silence another witness. And yet that cry for help disappeared into the void. There was no reply, no phone call, no sign that the letter had even been read. Days passed in silence. Then, on December 18, 1998, 15 days after departure, Bachchan returned to the UK alone. When asked about Surjit, she calmly claimed that Surjit was happy in Punjab and had decided to stay a little longer. But to those closer to the family, Bachchan offered a different story. This time, she said Surjit had fallen in love with a man in India and had run off to Delhi. She even claimed that Surjit called Sukhdev to say she no longer cared about her children or their education. In the face of such devastating accusations, Sukhdev chose to finalize the divorce. Contrary to what Bachchan claimed, Surjit's family slowly began to sense that something was terribly wrong. So on the morning of December 21st, 1998, her older brother, Jagdish Singh, went directly to the police to report the mysterious disappearance of his sister. Only from that point onward did an official investigation begin. Just a few weeks after police got involved, a chilling and unexpected moment unfolded in the Athwal household. That day, Surjit was home alone with Bachchan. No one asked any questions, but Bachchan suddenly spoke. Her tone was calm, almost casual, as she said Surjit had brought shame to the entire family, that the neighbors were starting to gossip, and this couldn't be allowed to continue. After a long pause, Surjit looked straight at her and, keeping her voice steady, gently asked, "Where is Surjit?" That simple question cracked the silence Bachchan had maintained for months. Without looking at Surjit, she began to speak slowly. The entire family had gone to Delhi airport, where her brother, Darshan Singh, was waiting to pick them up. After attending a wedding in the village, Surjit mentioned wanting to go shopping, so Bachchan gave her some money. Darshan and a friend had already prepared a jeep. Surjit got in. On the way, they handed her a bottle of water, already drugged. The moment she drank it, she passed out. Then, they strangled her to death, took all her jewelry, and dumped her body into the Ravi River. Though this confession was never officially reported to the authorities, Surjit's closest friend Jane, along with her brother Jagdish, continued to fight for justice. They made repeated visits to the UK Foreign Office, pleading for an investigation in Punjab. By February 1999, Sukhdev, still Surjit's legal husband, tried to claim a £135,000 life insurance payout, but was denied. Shortly after, he filed for divorce, falsely telling the court that Surjit had abandoned the family on her own. Mounting public and media pressure eventually forced the authorities to act. In May 2000, London police arrested Bachchan on suspicion of conspiracy to murder Surjit. However, she was released after just one day of questioning without being charged. Soon after, the police offered a reward of $13,500 for any information related to the disappearance. While this step signaled some initial progress, the stalled investigation only strengthened the determination of Surjit's loved ones. They continued their campaign, urging British politicians to step in and bring the case into the spotlight. During that time, Surjit remained trapped in a dark and oppressive life with the Athwal family. Though she had tried multiple times to escape, each attempt failed. By 2004, the abuse became so severe that Surjit suffered a mental breakdown and had to be hospitalized. After her release, she moved in with a legal guardian, and it was there for the first time that she told her father everything about what had happened to Surjit. Encouraged and supported by him, Surjit finally found the courage to go to the police and give an official statement. Surjit's testimony became the turning point police desperately needed to revive a case that had nearly faded into obscurity. By 2005, British authorities reopened the investigation into Surjit's death and dispatched a special task force to India to gather evidence and question key suspects. After more than a year of navigating legal barriers between the two countries, in August 2006, Bachchan and her son Sukhdev were arrested on charges of murder. That investigation led to a formal trial held in Old Delhi in 2007. For 3 consecutive days, Surjit bravely took the witness stand and recounted the horrific crime orchestrated by Bachchan and Sukhdev. She became the first British-born woman ever to testify in an honor-killing case against her own in-laws. Thanks to her unwavering and courageous testimony, both Bachchan and her son were sentenced to life in prison. Yet even so, justice was far from complete. The 2 men who physically murdered Surjit, Darshan, Bachchan's brother, and a close friend of his, were never held accountable. To this day, they continue to live freely in India, as though nothing ever happened. That's why the ending of this story offers no peace, only a lingering open wound for anyone who has ever heard the name Surjit Kaur. A devoted mother, a strong, resilient woman. And yet, she was betrayed and destroyed by the very family she married into, just to preserve the so-called honor of a household consumed by control and fear. Though a measure of justice was served, those who actually committed the murder remain at large, and so many questions remain unanswered. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next case we uncover.